My name is Jake, and I'm in the 7th grade. I live with my family in Montpelier, Vermont. I spend most of my free time in the basement of our house playing video games. The basement is my personal space where I can shut out the outside world. It's a dark place, perfect for creating the ideal atmosphere for my games. When my parents are out, I take advantage of the peace and quiet to relax and play. On that winter afternoon, I was home alone, playing a new shooter game. The clock showed that I still had a few hours before my parents would return. The snow was falling outside, but inside the basement, it was warm and cozy. I was so absorbed in the game that I didn't even notice when the sun started to set. The light in the basement grew dimmer, but that didn't matter because I was immersed in the action of the game. I was so focused that when a pause in the game left the basement in silence, I noticed how deep the silence in the house was, but that would soon change in a way I didn't expect. I had been playing for about an hour when I heard the first sound, a loud knock on the basement window. I thought it was a piece of ice or snow falling. After all, it was winter, and things like that happened. However, the knocking continued, becoming more frequent and persistent. It seemed like someone was throwing snowballs at the window, and I started to feel uneasy. Initially, I thought it was my brother who loved to play pranks on me, but then I remembered he was at a friend's house and wouldn't be back anytime soon. The knocks had a rhythm and insistence that didn't seem like a joke. I got up from the couch, paused the game, and stayed silent, trying to listen more closely. The knocking continued, each one louder than the last. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain to look. I didn't see anyone, and the snow in the yard seemed untouched, without any signs of movement or footprints. I sat back down, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or something similar. But the persistent knocks left me feeling uneasy. Something was wrong, and I needed to find out what it was. I decided I couldn't ignore what was happening. I grabbed my phone and slowly climbed the stairs, trying not to make any noise. When I reached the living room, I opened a small gap in the curtain of the window that faced the backyard. What I saw left me frozen. A shadowy figure crouched between the bushes in the garden. They were hiding, clearly trying not to be seen. I quickly closed the curtain and backed away, trying not to panic. I grabbed my phone and called my parents, who were on their way home. "Mom, there's someone outside throwing things at the house, and now they're in the backyard, hiding in the bushes," I said, trying to stay calm. My mom responded quickly, saying they would be home soon and that I should lock myself inside the house. I hung up the phone and began checking all the locks and bolts on the doors, ensuring everything was secure. Suddenly, I heard a metallic noise coming from the kitchen window. I ran over and saw the doorknob moving, as if someone was trying to force it open. My heart was pounding. The intruder was getting bolder, trying to break into the house. I needed to do something fast. As I watched the kitchen window, the intruder changed their strategy. The knocking was now aimed at the upper floor, specifically at my bedroom window. The idea of someone trying to get into my personal space was terrifying. Every knock on my bedroom window made my heart race. It was as if the intruder knew where to target to cause the most fear. Finally, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My parents had arrived. I ran to the front door and unlocked it hurriedly. My mom got out of the car, her expression changing from relief to concern when she saw my face. "He's trying to get into my room," I said, my voice trembling. My mom quickly called the police, explaining the situation. My dad began checking all the doors and windows again while we waited for the police to arrive. The wait was agonizing. We stayed together in the living room, trying to listen for any sign that the intruder was still outside. Finally, we heard the police sirens approaching. The police arrived quickly and began investigating the area. The officers followed the trail of footprints in the snow and checked the windows the intruder had tried to open. One of the officers informed us that they found fresh footprints, but there was no sign of anyone nearby. After the officers collected information, they assured us they would patrol the area frequently during the night. Although their presence brought some comfort, the sense of security we had before the incident was shaken. Later, as we relaxed in the living room, we discussed what might have happened. My mom speculated if it could have been a prank, while my dad considered the possibility of an actual attempted break-in. I couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure I saw outside. The following week, my routine returned to normal, but the incident left a lasting impact. The experience taught me the importance of being prepared and vigilant. I talked to my parents about installing a more robust security system, including external cameras and better locks on the windows and doors. We wanted to ensure something like this didn't happen again. That night was a reminder that safety is something we should always value and protect. The feeling of vulnerability motivated me to keep my family safe and always alert to the realities of the world around us. I live in Boston, where I lead a pretty hectic life. In addition to my regular job, I own a rental house in Concord, New Hampshire. The property is a beautiful country home surrounded by the peaceful forest, a perfect retreat for tenants looking to get away from the city noise. Recently, a large group rented the house for the weekend. They had already left, so I went up there to check if everything was in order before the next reservation. I always make these personal visits after long stays, just to ensure the house remains in good condition. As soon as I arrived, I was greeted by the serenity of the place. A thin layer of snow covered the ground, and the silence was absolute, except for the gentle sound of the trees swaying in the wind. I started inspecting the exterior of the house, checking for any damage to the walls or roof. Everything seemed normal at first glance. I went inside to check the rooms and was relieved to find the interior clean and well-maintained. However, as I went back outside to examine the surrounding property, I noticed something intriguing. A series of footprints in the fresh snow, starting at the house's entrance and extending into the nearby forest. The footprints didn't seem to belong to an animal. They were human and recent, indicating someone had been there after the guests had left. Following the footprints, I realized they circled my property and the neighbors. The marks were distinct in the fresh snow, sinking deep, as if the person had walked slowly, maybe stopping to observe something. The footprints didn't just circle the houses, they led to the forest bordering the properties. The trail was clear and seemed to be made by only one person. My mind began to form theories. Could it have been someone simply curious and exploring the area, or something more sinister? The uneasiness grew as I approached the edge of the forest, where the footprints disappeared among the trees. The forest, which had once seemed like a beautiful backdrop for the house, now took on a more ominous presence. The bare branches of the trees stood like bony fingers against the gray sky, and the silence that was once peaceful now felt laden with expectation. I hesitated to follow the footprints further into the forest. An instinct for self-preservation warned me about the potential danger of proceeding alone. I decided to head back to the house and try to figure out what those footprints meant. As I moved away from the forest, I felt as if I was being watched, but I saw nothing except the cold wind beginning to blow more fiercely. When night finally fell, the feeling of discomfort didn't fade. The silence around the house was interrupted only by the occasional howl of the wind, which only heightened the tension. As I tried to relax on the couch, watching some random show, I heard something that put me on alert again. The sound of footsteps, clear and distinct, as if someone were walking around the house. I froze for a moment, listening intently. The footsteps were slow and methodical, getting closer and closer. I grabbed a baseball bat next to me and cautiously stood up. I decided to investigate. Holding the bat firmly in my hands, I went out the back door, trying not to make any noise. My breath was heavy as I crept along the side of the house, where the footsteps seemed the loudest. The footprints I saw earlier in the snow now seemed even more sinister under the moonlight. I noticed they led directly to the air conditioning unit and then to the forest, suggesting someone had been on the roof. My heart raced when I saw new footprints mixed with the old ones. It was clear that the intruder's presence hadn't been random. They were watching the house. With the discovery of fresh footprints and evidence that someone was nearby, I decided to involve the authorities. I quickly went back inside, locked the door, and headed straight for the phone. I called the police, reporting everything I had discovered. "There's someone lurking around my property," I explained, trying to stay calm. "I found footprints leading from the roof to the forest. This can't be a coincidence." The dispatcher, with a calm and professional voice, assured me that a patrol would be sent immediately. I felt a little more relieved knowing help was on the way, but the fear still hung in the air as I waited anxiously. Soon, I saw the red and blue lights of the patrol cars reflecting on the house's walls. 2 officers arrived quickly, and I went out to meet them at the front door. I explained in detail what was happening, showing them the footprints and describing the sounds I heard. The officers conducted a thorough inspection around the property. They examined the footprints and confirmed that there were signs someone had been walking on the roof. Despite this, they couldn't find anyone in the vicinity. "We'll keep a close eye," one of the officers said. "Stay safe and keep in touch if anything else happens." The experience of the previous night had shaken my sense of security, but with the presence of the officers and the absence of further incidents, I began to feel some relief. The idea of someone prowling around the property still bothered me, but now I knew the situation was being monitored by local authorities. In the following days, police patrols were constant, ensuring any suspicious activity was quickly addressed. The tranquility of the place started to return, and the guests at the property sent positive messages about their stays without mentioning any strange activity. As I tidied up the house and cleared the footprints left in the snow, I reflected on how easy it was to underestimate the need for vigilance, even in places considered safe. This experience taught me the importance of always being alert, especially in isolated areas. I decided to enhance the property's security by installing cameras in strategic spots and motion sensor lights around the house. I put up signs about the increased security, hoping it would deter any future suspicious activity. With improved security and the feeling of peace restored, I continued renting out the property. The new security systems worked as planned, and there were no more issues. Despite the disturbing episode, things returned to normal, and the property continued to be a popular destination for those seeking a relaxing getaway. Even though peace had returned, my approach had changed. Now, I always check everything thoroughly before each rental and keep close contact with the local police to be aware of any suspicious activity in the area. This incident was a clear reminder that no matter how safe an area may seem, it's always important to be prepared for the unexpected. And so, with that lesson learned, I moved forward. More attentive and cautious, but grateful that I was able to keep the property and its guests safe. I was eagerly looking forward to an unforgettable weekend in the Colorado Rockies with my girlfriend, Jalen, my buddy John, and his girlfriend, Katie. We had been planning this trip for weeks, and the idea of escaping to a secluded cabin, far from the hustle and bustle of city life, seemed perfect. When we arrived at the cabin, we were greeted by a breathtaking scene. Snow-capped mountains stood majestically against the blue sky, and the cabin, surrounded by tall pine trees, looked like something out of a postcard. The air was crisp and refreshing as we unloaded the car and carried our stuff inside. The cabin was charming and cozy, made of rustic wood with a wraparound porch and large windows offering panoramic views of the mountains. Inside, there was a stone fireplace in the corner of the living room, which we were already looking forward to lighting later. The place was equipped with everything we needed: a compact kitchen, a dining table, and 2 comfortable bedrooms, each with a king-size bed. As we settled in, Jalen and Katie were discussing plans for the weekend. "We need to go for a hike tomorrow," Katie said, looking at the map hanging on the wall in the living room. "There's a great trail that starts just a few minutes from here." John and I agreed, already imagining the adventure that awaited us. "We can also do some skiing," I suggested, thinking about the gear we had brought in the trunk. And of course, we can't forget the bonfire at night. The idea of spending nights around the fireplace, sharing stories, and enjoying the tranquility of the place was exactly what I needed. The cabin seemed to offer the perfect balance of relaxation and adventure. The atmosphere was one of pure excitement. The cabin was everything we had hoped for, a peaceful retreat in the middle of nature, far from any signs of civilization. The plan was simple: disconnect, enjoy each other's company, and explore the wonders of the mountains. As the afternoon turned to evening, the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Sitting together in the living room, with warm drinks in hand, we had no idea that this weekend would become much more than just a relaxing getaway. After a quiet night, we woke up eager to enjoy our first full day in the Rockies. The sun was shining in a clear blue sky, and the fresh snow looked inviting, perfect for our planned activities. John and I carried our skis outside while Jalen and Katie prepared for a lighter hike. The feeling of freedom was incredible, and the scenery around us was breathtaking. The mountains rose imposingly, and the quiet of the place provided a peace we rarely found in the city. After a morning of skiing, we stopped for a quick lunch at the foot of a hill. The environment was so calm it was hard to imagine anything disturbing happening there. It was in the afternoon when we decided to go for a longer hike that things started to feel strange. As we walked through the snow, the sound of our footsteps seemed to echo differently. John and I were in front, and suddenly we both stopped as we heard a sound that didn't fit with the natural surroundings: low moans and soft footsteps. "Did you hear that?" I asked, looking at John, who seemed equally confused. "Yeah, I thought it was the wind, but "I'm not sure," he replied, frowning as he listened carefully. We continued walking, but now we were more alert. The sound seemed to follow us, lurking in the shadows of the surrounding trees. The feeling of being watched intensified, as if there were invisible eyes tracking our every move. We tried to convince ourselves we were just being paranoid. After all, we were in a forest, and there could be many animals we didn't know. But the feeling of being followed persisted, and no matter how much we looked around, we couldn't identify the source of the sounds. "We better head back to the cabin," I suggested. "The girls must be wondering where we are." John nodded, clearly uncomfortable with what was happening. We started walking back in silence, quickening our pace as the sun began to set. Finally, we spotted the cabin in the distance, and the sight of it brought a momentary sense of relief. The lights were on, and we could see Jalen and Katie moving inside the cabin. While we were still making our way down the trail back to the cabin, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was a message from Jalen. I stopped to read it, and immediately, my stomach dropped. "Jalen, I saw people outside the cabin. They're looking through the windows. Come quickly." I showed the message to John, who instantly turned serious. Without saying a word, we started running toward the cabin, feeling the cold sting our faces. The snow made running difficult, but that didn't matter. Our thoughts were focused on Jalen and Katie, who were alone and scared. When we finally arrived, the cabin looked even more isolated than before. The lights inside cast long, eerie shadows on the snow-covered ground. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart as John and I approached the door. We burst through the door quickly, almost knocking it off its hinges, and found Jalen and Katie in the living room, both with faces marked by fear. They greeted us with relief, but the tension still hung in the air. "What happened?" I asked. Jalen was visibly shaken, and Katie had her arms crossed, trying to warm herself. "We were watching TV when we heard footsteps outside," Jalen began. "At first, we thought it was you guys coming back, but when I looked out the window, I saw two people standing out there. I couldn't see their faces, but they were watching the cabin." Katie nodded in agreement. "They seemed to be trying to look inside." John and I exchanged a look. The girl's description matched the unsettling feeling we had experienced in the forest. Something strange was going on, and we needed to act quickly. "I locked all the doors and windows after you sent the message," Katie said. "But please, don't go outside again." The tension in the cabin was palpable as we all gathered in the living room to discuss our next steps. John held the gun firmly, his expression determined, ready to protect himself and his friends. I suggested we block the doors and windows with furniture to make it harder for anyone to get in. Jalen agreed, and soon we were dragging chairs and tables to form an improvised barricade. The cabin was small and cozy, but at that moment, it felt like a fortress we needed to defend. "Let's keep the lights off and speak quietly. If we stay quiet, maybe they'll think we're not here," Katie suggested, her voice still tinged with fear. We agreed in whispers, trying to stay calm. As we reinforced the security, every sound of the creaking wood or the wind hitting the windows made us jump. The feeling of being watched didn't go away, and we were all on high alert. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the cabin, interrupting our discussions and making our hearts race. The sound was so loud and unexpected that, for a moment, we froze in place. "Everyone, silence," I whispered, gesturing for us to calm down. The knocking continued, rhythmic and insistent, as if someone knew we were inside and wanted a response. I looked at John, who was gripping the gun tighter, then at Jalen and Katie, who were huddled on the couch. "We can't let them know we're here," John whispered back. "If we stay quiet, maybe they'll give up." After what felt like hours, the knocking finally stopped, leaving us in the same oppressive silence as before. Nobody moved, waiting for the intruder to finally leave. The silence that followed was deafening, but nobody dared to break it. We stayed there, in silent vigil, alert to any other signs that someone might still be around. Finally, when the first light began to peek through the curtains, we allowed ourselves to breathe a little easier. There were no more knocks, and the cabin remained secure for the rest of the night. With the first light of dawn, the group began to relax a little, but the tension from the previous night still lingered in the air. The cabin was cold, and everyone got up, exhausted and a bit confused after a night of hardly any sleep. John and I were the first to leave the cabin to check the surroundings. The snow was untouched, a white and pure stretch without signs of disturbance. There were no footprints, nothing to indicate that anyone or anything had been outside during the night. The loud knocks and sounds we heard seemed to have been erased like a distant memory. "It doesn't make sense," John murmured, looking around. There had to be someone out there. We both searched every visible corner around the cabin, looking for any clues that could explain what had happened, but it was as if the snow had been replaced overnight, hiding any evidence that we were being watched. Katie and Jalen came out shortly after, and we all shared a perplexed look. The absence of footprints or any signs of intrusion left us even more confused. As we gathered again inside the cabin, the air was full of unanswered questions. The experience had been intense and frightening, but the lack of concrete evidence left a bitter taste of doubt. "Could we have been imagining things?" Jalen asked, trying to make sense of how we felt. It seemed so real. "Those knocks, they couldn't just be our imagination," Katie added, still trying to process what happened. The reality that we might be at the mercy of something inexplicable hung over us. The Rockies, as beautiful as they are dangerous, had shown us a side we didn't expect. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something out there we might never understand. I looked at John, who was still holding the gun, as if expecting some explanation to appear out of nowhere. "We should leave," he finally said. "There's no point in staying here any longer." We quickly agreed. It was clear that, despite our initial excitement, the weekend we had planned at the cabin had turned into something more sinister than we could handle. As we packed up and cleaned the cabin, we exchanged impressions and tried to keep the mood light, but we all felt the weight of what we experienced. We left the cabin in the Rockies before noon, our hearts still pounding with adrenaline from the previous night. As the car wound down the snowy roads, a final glance at the cabin behind us left a sense of unresolved mystery. On the way back, the silence in the car was broken only by small comments and theories about what really happened. Each of us, in our own way, was trying to make sense of the event, knowing that the answers might never come.